very last innings of COVID. And that flexibility is appreciated. I heard a lot of talk about, the involvement of the legislature. Last time around, they were very clear. They're going to have a gang of six, the legislative leaders, and we want them to weigh in. And they've got another 36 hours or so if they want to opine on any of the EOs that are out there. They have the right to do that. If they don't think that nurses or teachers have to get vaccinated, they can do that. But I really appreciate the fact that they're standing with us on this, doing everything we can to keep you safe. I was also the tone a little bit as I heard the testimony implied that, we're still in some sort of a lockdown and things haven't changed despite our extraordinary progress in managing COVID. And as you know, we've gone from 300 plus executive orders down to about, I think it's 11 that we're asking the legislative leadership to agree to keep going a little bit longer. As you know, we never closed down outdoor construction. We never closed down so much of what we've done. We've got our restaurants, we've got even our bars are open. I'm really proud our schools were open last year, our schools are open this year, and we're open safely, and kids are able to go to school. And that's because of some of the executive orders that we're going to talk about in a minute that allow them to stay safely in school. I think Manisha reminded me that there's been, thousands of schools that have had to close down for quarantine. These are overwhelmingly schools where kids are not masked or teachers are not being asked to get vaccinated. That's close to 1 million students, and that's not here in Connecticut. Our schools are open, and our schools are open safely. And that's thanks to you and thanks to the last of the remaining executive orders, which I appreciate working with the legislature. We've got in place for a little bit longer. What I really like to talk about now is what we do going forward. And I think the most important issue is the vaccinations and the testing requirements for our state employees. Josh has been very good. We've got, I think it's 70+% of our state employees have responded to the questionnaire we needed to know your status in terms of vaccination, your status in terms of your plans to get tested, how you plan to get tested. We still have, thousands coming in every day. It is going to take us a few more days to sift through that to see exactly what the status is. I am very pleased looking at, for example, New York, not to mention Connecticut, and the fact that we have this mandate out there for vaccination. What you saw in New York, the rush of people at the end of the day realizing getting vaccinated is the right thing to do, what that has meant in terms of their public health, what that meant in terms of hospitals, what that meant in terms of nursing homes. And I think we're going to be seeing the same here in the great state of Connecticut. Those are sort of some of the key items we had. I can talk about where we are. We've got strong support with labor. Labor is busy explaining this to state employees going forward. State employees have another period of time to get their information into us, tell us how they plan to vaccinate, free of charge, no questions asked, how they plan to test. We'll pay for that for at least the initial month to make it easier for you to test. Well, we want you to get vaccinated, to tell you the truth. And if you won't get vaccinated, if you won't get tested, then there'll be an unpaid leave. That's a little ways off. Right now, I'm really enthusiastic about the fact that more and more of our state employees are getting vaccinated. Our school bus drivers got to work, and we're going to make sure that we can keep our economy going and our kids in school safely. And with that, I have some people behind me who know what they're talking about. Any questions?
How many state employees have reported that they are either partially vaccinated or fully vaccinated as we stand here today?
My understanding is we've got about 70% of our state employees have responded to date. Many more have partial responses, so we're working that through. A majority of them, Josh, why don't you take this in terms of the actual numbers?
Sure. So as of yesterday, we have about 19,000 of our, this is all executive branch numbers I'm going to quote for now, so about 19,000 employees in the executive branch have already reported being fully vaccinated, It's about 60% roughly of the population. Another 10% have reported that they're in compliance with the weekly testing requirement. And as the governor mentioned, we're waiting. We're still sorting through the paperwork and following up with the remaining 30%.
What do you have any numbers on the number of applications for medical or religious exemptions? And are there any numbers on the number of applications that have been approved or rejected?
So just as a reminder, for employees who have the testing option in lieu of vaccination, they do not need to submit a medical or religious exemption. So that's just for the healthcare, the hospital workers. I don't have a number on that for you yet, Paul, but we'll be happy to share that once the numbers are finalized. What was the second part of your question?
Well, do you know how many have been approved or rejected?
Okay, yeah, not yet. This is all interim data, so that we'll update it as it gets closer to final.
And what sort of requirements do people have to? What are the is there a place we can look up the application for religious and medical exemption to see exactly what you're asking for?
Yes.
And perhaps you could summarize what it is that you're asking for people.
Absolutely, it's on the
letter from the clergyman or note from your doctor.
all the documents and instructions are on the DAS website, and I'd be happy to send you the link.
That is only for the medical and the healthcare workers. The
Correct.
exemptions apply for those, not for
Correct.
state employees.
For all the other state employees, the vast majority of state employees, they do not need to complete those religious or medical exemption forms. They can voluntarily decide just to test instead.
How many do you think will take that option of just testing? And I heard the governor say that it would only be for a month that would be,
Yeah.
that the state would pay for that, and then what would happen?
Well, so far, as I mentioned, it's about 6 to 1, right? People fully vaccinated versus testing. As those remaining folks come in, we don't know how that will shake out, but anecdotally, as we've looked at that initial list we saw yesterday, who's currently sitting in non-compliant status, there's a lot of people in there who are vaccinated and that somehow their paperwork got caught up. They didn't maybe complete the form properly. So we're confident there will be a lot of additional people who are fully vaccinated reporting. And then as the governor mentioned, what we've seen of others who've implemented these vaccines and completed them sooner, like the hospitals here in Connecticut as well as in New York, United Airlines reported today that they got 99% compliance on vaccinations, but everyone sees a big surge at the last minute, right? Once that deadline's finally approaching, you see a lot of additional vaccinations occur.
What is the deadline for state employees?
So as the governor mentioned, because we're still working through the paperwork and it's taking a little longer than expected, we're giving people until the end of the day on Monday, October 4th. That is the final deadline for compliance.
You started talking about paperwork, but this is all digital, right?
Correct. Well, yes. However, we have given employees, at the request of a number of our employees and our partners in labor, options to fax in documentation, to email in manual attachments that then require manual data entry. That is proving to be the most time consuming, and there have been thousands of people who've taken that approach.
Okay, so I just want to be clear on the numbers. You said 19,000 executive branch employees have said they are vaccinated.
Yeah, and just before you go further, I want to be very clear because I don't want the headline tomorrow to be these are interim data, right? So this will change day by day.
But that's 19,000 out of a universe of how many?
Out of a universe of 32,000.
Okay, and the 19,000 represent, and so how many raw numbers, you gave a percentage, how many of the 32,000 have filled out the form one way or the other?
So round numbers, 19,000, as I mentioned, have completed the paperwork indicating that they're fully vaccinated. A little over 3,000 have completed the paperwork indicating that they are in compliance with the testing requirements, and a little over 10,000 are not complete yet.
Okay, and is this simply they must attest, or do they have to provide results of a vaccination card?
Both.
Okay.
So we're aware, obviously, of the group of bus drivers who said that they weren't going to get vaccinated or get tested. Are you aware of significant numbers in other parts of state government who have kind of taken that same stand?
No, we're not yet. And in fact, as the governor said, we're very optimistic that the number of people who ultimately are in a non-compliant status at the end of the day on Monday will be relatively small. We are anticipating that there will be some, and our agencies are making contingency plans and planning for those risks accordingly, just in case there are.
And so the governor mentioned being placed on leave at some point. What exactly is the timeline for that? What is the process? Are there scales of levels of discipline, or how exactly will the process work for that?
So as the governor said, the initial step, and the only one that we're talking about at this point, is people being placed on unpaid leave, which implies the obvious, that you won't be getting a paycheck. And there's other aspects of that that are very significant in terms of your liabilities related to your health care, insurance, premiums, your retirement eligibility, timing, your seniority, et cetera. So it's a significant penalty for noncompliance.
So if you're not compliant by the end of Monday, are you on unpaid leave on Tuesday?
So you could be put out on unpaid leave as soon as Tuesday, but no later than the following Monday, the 11th. That's the date at which. And the reason for that is because, again, similar to today, we will have some last-minute paperwork that comes in that Monday night. We'll have to work through that. To the extent that agencies need to implement contingency plans based on that, they'll need some time to do so.
Governor Lamont, can you talk about the pushback that we're seeing? And obviously, we have people here in the Capitol this week. In New York now, teachers. We're seeing a lot of people who don't want to be vaccinated, and they're worried about losing their jobs. Are you concerned that this could hurt you and your administration, or?
I'm concerned about making sure we're well prepared if there is another Delta. I'm really concerned about making sure I keep our schools open and our economy going. I'm, as Josh said, pretty optimistic. I see what's happened in New York. I see the surge of people coming in, facing a mandate, and they are getting vaccinated. I think that's a really positive sign. I think we've seen some signs of that here in Connecticut as well. So, look, there'll be some people who say, hell no. And I'm sorry, but that means you're not safe. You're not safe to the people around you, and you're not safe for the people you're treating, and they cannot come into work.
Do you think here in Connecticut that most people will take your advice and warning and do it, or do you think we're going to see more people saying no?
Connecticut for the last year has always done the right thing. And we've done it with some pushing, we've done it with some explanation, and I think Connecticut and our employees are all going to do the right thing.
What is the
CEA
rationale?
has said the one problem their members have kind of run into is inaccessibility of state testing locations for the people who choose not to get vaccinated, that the hours aren't good, maybe they're during the school day or they're not close enough. Are there any plans to sort of enhance?
How many hundreds of testing sites do we have?
So there are over 300 testing sites in the state, a lot of pharmacies. They're geographically distributed all over the state. At the end of this week, we'll have 23 state-sponsored testing sites, again, geographically distributed around the state. Hours vary. You go to 211 website and you put in your zip code and you can find all kinds of access to testing. So we really have not seen at all limitations in testing availability. It may not be the exact time that somebody's looking for, but there is widely available testing.
So you said 23 state sites by the end of the week, so how many are there today, or how many were there?
I think there are 19 as of today.
22.
Today.
So you're adding more.
We're adding one more. 22 as of today, the commissioner tells me.
On the subject of exemptions, are all state employees allowed to apply for medical or religious exemptions, or no?
So only state hospital employees, and that's defined in the executive order, but fundamentally it's people who work at Whiting, Connecticut Valley Hospital, several of the hospitals. They do not have a test out option. So if they prefer not to be vaccinated, they can apply for a medical or religious exemption. They will need to test weekly in lieu of vaccination. For all other state employees, they do not need to apply for a medical or religious exemption. They can just go ahead and test weekly.
When would we reach the point of termination? We talked about unpaid leave. Is there a certain period of time where there would be unpaid leave and then it would?
Yeah, that's a discussion for another day. I think, as the governor mentioned, the initial steps and consequences are significant, and we're very optimistic that the number of people who don't comply in the end will be very small.
Dr. Jutan?
What about unemployment? Would any of these state employees or, maybe a healthcare worker who decides not to get vaccinated, would they be able to qualify?
Yeah, as we know, there are no universal answers when it comes to unemployment. Every individual case is slightly unique, but it seems very likely that people will not be eligible for unemployment because they would be on unpaid leave because of deliberate non-compliance with an executive order.
Governor, what can you say to people who were out here protesting yesterday and even members of this legislature who just don't see an end to this? You know, it's the sixth time, it's almost 2 years, it's going to be to February 15th. What would you say to people who just don't think this is going to end?
I'd say look where we were a year ago. Look where we were a year and a half ago. Look where we are today. The people say not going to end, they were all in the building. They were voting. We've got our schools open. Kids are in the classroom. All the kids are in the classroom. Last year, a lot of kids were hesitant even though the schools were open. We're getting back to normal, but we're getting back to normal in a safe way that allows our schools and businesses to stay open. I think the vast majority of the people of Connecticut know we're doing this right with an eye on public safety and keeping your kids in school and you at your job.
What's your expectation regarding vaccination rate? You know, what do you think Connecticut's going to achieve in terms of fully vaccinated?
I think we've surprised on the upside since the very beginning of this thing, Paul, and we're at whatever it is, 87 to 80%, 88% for those over 87, those over 18, which I think is about the highest in the country. Now I think with some of these mandates giving people an incentive, I'd like to think we'll get up to over 90% for those eligible. And I think that makes an enormous difference. Look, I look around the country, I heard the briefings, you know, emergency's over, happy days are here again. Look what's going on in Minnesota. Look what's going on in Alaska. Look what's going on in Michigan. And closer to home, look what's going on in Maine and New Hampshire and Vermont. So nobody wants us to get back to total freedom faster than I do. We're going to be cautious a little bit longer, and it's worked so far.
How many of the 32,000 executive branch employees are being permitted to work at home or otherwise work remotely?
Anybody know that?
Don't have an exact number on that, but to be clear, teleworking is a separate topic. It is not an accommodation for someone who...
Well, I'm not suggesting it is, but my follow-up question will make clear why I'm asking that.
Go ahead.
You know, what is for people who are working alone at home, what is the rationale for requiring that they be vaccinated or test out?
Sure. It's a fair question. So first of all, I don't have an exact number, but there are very few people at this point who are working exclusively from home.
It's exclusively. So even though somebody may have permission to work remotely, they're coming into the office at least. Okay, I got it.
Exactly. At least a few days a week. And then, you know, that interim telework agreement ends on October 1st, which is Friday, and we'll probably see more people coming into the office that aren't
okay, so
the last couple weeks as well.
Even though it's a small number, what's the rationale for applying it to them as well?
So for people who have, you know, an ADA accommodation, let's say, to telework 100% of the time, this is one of the topics we're discussing with our partners in labor in terms of, you know, what is the right approach for folks. People who are out on long-term leaves, people who are on vacation for a period of time, et cetera. So we're working through those details in a cooperative way with labor.
So what happens with the telework policy on October 1st? Because I think we've been kind of sat through this movie once before.
Yep.
On October 2nd, what are the telework rules?
So I think that we've shared the details on that agreement that was established a couple of months ago, but effectively the expectation generally is that employees will be 50% in the office.
Okay.
Agency heads have the flexibility and the discretion if they can meet the mission to provide for some additional telework, or in some cases where they need more people in the office, they have the discretion to bring them in more frequently as well.
I just need to understand, did the mandatory, well, I'm going to call it a mandatory testing requirement for state employees, was that negotiated with the union?
So some of the details have already been established in a formal agreement with the union, but some are still under negotiation.
Can you characterize those negotiations, Josh?
I think all parties have the same goal, which is the health and safety of our employees, of the people of Connecticut that we serve. And I think the discussions have been collaborative and positive, moving towards agreement on all open items.
When might that agreement be reached?
We're not sure at this point.
Are you on track for arbitration at this point?
Don't know.
And is 15,000 tests a week still a good number for us to say the number of new people getting vaccinated in the state? Isn't that what you used last week? Is that,
People getting vaccinated per
Yeah,
week,
yeah.
new first doses. That was the number last week. That's been the number for the last couple of weeks.
Governor, political question for you. The Connecticut has ended up in the same place as Massachusetts, New York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, and so forth. Some of those states have let their states of emergency lapse. Some of them have done some interim steps. So it's a political question. Have you considered doing something less than a full-blown state of emergency, given that seems to be in large measure due to the opposition in some quarters. Some people obviously are opposed to the policies, namely masks and vaccines. But have you given any thought to approaching it differently to get around the issue of the extraordinary powers that are at your fingertips right now?
Extraordinary powers with checks and balances by the legislature when they're in session, by the legislative leadership, when they're not in session. If you don't like any of our executive orders, here's your opportunity to stand up and say so. And I really believe we're going to be done with this, sooner rather than later. I think by this next cycle, unless there's another Delta, I can't tell you what's going to happen. But I think we're in the right place. Look, I can play games and say Manisha has the powers, or the governor has the powers, or a committee does. I think right now we have a collaboration with the different branches of government. The court has approved what we're doing, and now legislature and the executive branch working together to sign off on our executive orders going forward.
Can I ask
we
either
ask you a
Dr.
couple questions, science-based?
Go on in, Manisha.
I'm gonna just boom my stool.
Yesterday there was a lot of talk about this continuing through the winter, and that there was some notion that there was going to be some other type of surge come November. What are you hearing from a medical standpoint that folks should be looking out for? Basis for the powers being extended.
In general, respiratory viruses circulate when it is cold outside. When the humidity drops, viral particles tend to stay in the air longer, and this is when people tend to get respiratory viruses. So just like all other coronaviruses that we know, and the flu, which we know is potentially going to come back this year, this is when we anticipate respiratory viruses to circulate. So with the Delta wave, honestly, I was hoping we were going to have a longer summer and that we weren't going to see the Delta wave and that it would happen in the winter. But the virus is not listening to my opinion. The virus has its own mind. And we've seen what's happened over the last 2 months. And so we have to be prepared that we will have another cycle like that through the winter. But I'm hopeful that maybe we will just get away with sort of a steady, maybe a slight uptick, but not very high numbers because of the very high vaccination rates that we have in the state of Connecticut.
So at what point do we think the emergency declaration can end? Do you wait for a certain metric to hit? How do you gauge that?
We have to look at the numbers as they happen and as things are evolving. We know that childhood vaccines are likely going to be approved in the next several weeks, month, in that ballpark. Being another group of 400,000 plus people in the state of Connecticut potentially eligible for a vaccine, thereby reducing the number of eligible people for the virus, is going to give us some more information and more metrics. If we see very low positivity rates and we don't see another massive surge coming, we'll be able to assess those numbers in real time. It's very difficult to predict the future at this point.
Dr. Tani, we talked numerous times when you were at Yale, but one of the questions that's come up a lot in email from folks is, how come in the United States we're not accounting for natural immunity at all? And in other countries, especially Israel, they're saying that folks who are infected, especially with the Delta variant, they're finding that they're 20 plus times more protected than someone who hasn't had COVID and just receives the vaccine. When will we start seeing some data in the United States, specifically Connecticut, about how well protected people actually are if they've had COVID but not been vaccinated?
I think this is a moving target a little bit. So what I mean by that is that earlier on in the first wave that we were seeing and second wave, immunity from the virus seemed to be smaller than if you were to get vaccinated. I think this data is still coming out. We will see what natural immunity really means, as you said, with the Delta wave, with other variants that people may have had. But the sure way that we know that people can have that immunity to a level that is protective, because we've seen that in trials, versus natural immunity, it's a hodgepodge of data that's out there. It's cross-sectional data that you get blood from a bunch of people versus critically evaluated clinical trials that show that vaccination certainly gets you to a certain level of immunity. Because we know that, that's something that we can absolutely rely on. And we need the science to catch up with what we're experiencing. And because we're in a pandemic, the surefire way to make sure that we address that question is to get people vaccinated. I understand that's frustrating for some people because the science lags and we have different information that come out from different areas around the world, and our CDC scientists are constantly evaluating that information as we get it.
But the study also says that if you've had COVID and you get the vaccine, wow, you've got a lot of protection.
Exactly the point, which is why we are still encouraging and asking people to get vaccinated despite having had COVID, because you don't know what your response to COVID would have been. Some people may have just very little antibodies that wane quickly, and somebody else may have a lot of antibodies. And so that really varies based on the person, your own immune system, but vaccination is the way to make sure that we get to a certain level.
Dr. Jitani, can you tell me what the Department of Public Health is doing to verify the religious exemption and medical exemption data for healthcare workers?
So we are still in the process of gathering all of that information at this time. So it's a fluid situation because we're still kind of going through all that paperwork.
So are you doing it for, long-term care facilities, nursing homes, hospitals? Is that all like?
Right. So for the long-term care facilities, they all had to report to us, and so we are going through those reporting metrics to see, where we exactly stand in terms of the reporting from all of the different homes that report to us.
And is there a standardized reporting form that we can look up to see what kind of information that you're asking of these people on your website somewhere?
You mean a specific form,
Yeah,
or?
I'd like to be able to look up and see exactly what you're asking these people to present.
Mm-hmm. So
I'm just wondering.
yes, there is a standardized form that people can look up to be able to. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Josh, does that October 4th deadline for the state workers of the executive branch extend out to the bus drivers?
So districts have until the 4th to report back to us on all their compliance information as well. But the deadlines for employee compliance is up to the districts.
So the districts
And
are
I think their
charging that
I think their deadlines were Monday.
Let me just add, Jody, other metric that I look at is what's going on in other states. I mean, we can be in really good shape here in Connecticut, but if Maine or Pennsylvania is ramping up in a big way, we're not an island. And, Paul, on the religious exemptions, I just want to note that every major faith leader in the world is really stepped up and said how important it is to get vaccinated. And that has a lot of meaning to me. People have their own individual faith decisions. I understand that as well. Hey, thanks, everybody. Great to see you.
I'm sorry, Governor, since you raised that, the courts have taken a fairly lenient view when somebody asserts based on faith, even though the courts also have been very protective of the rights of public health officials to make certain positions on the public. But how will you characterize your administration's assessment of what is a legitimate faith exemption, given what you just said, that every major religion and major faith leader has said, no, there should be no reason to exempt them?
Let's see if people trying to exploit it, or these are really deeply held faith reasons they put forward. But the more important thing is,
test for that, though, sir, for individuals.
Well, I think first of all it'll be the numbers. Is this something that's being exploited, or is these a very small group of Mother Teresa's who come forward and feel deeply? But I really want people vaccinated. If you're a nurse in a nursing home taking care of my mother, maybe whatever your faith is, I want you vaccinated so you're safe and she's safe. Okay, thanks everybody.
But somebody could wake up this morning and say they've developed a religious